So patch 114 was just released a few days ago, and it made a lot of huge changes. My favorite, which is widely known, is the changes to PCR, last boss of the final DLC. It's so widely known that even Ultimate Buildmaker Jazza97 even shouted me out in his reaction video.
And also improve the visibility of some attack effects. Shout out to Ocelot, because I know that he is fist pumping right now.
But this video is going to be about Rellana's cameo and the huge change that it got from patch 1.14. So before patch, you had to hold the stance for all the 7 stance skills for 1.5 seconds. If you held that, your character would get a 15% extra damage boost to that stance skill. After this patch, the time to wait went from 1.5 to 1 second, and instead of getting just 15% damage, you'll be getting an extra 45% damage to the skill. Now in the background, the first weapon we're going to be talking about is Milady. Before I go further, keep in mind this is not a ranking list. This is just all 7 skills that benefit from Rellana's cameo. We're starting off with Milady against Placidusax because he gives big openings, so you can see the damage difference from when the skill gets the boost and from when the skill does not get the boost. So I'll show you some gameplay, then we'll go over the stats and equipment that I believe will get you the best damage for each stance skill. Now before patch, Wing Stance was already a viable weapon skill, and you can get through the game pretty much with ease. And now with this buff to Rellana's cameo, this has made Wing Stance a definitive S tier option, and Milady, which already was an S tier weapon, just solidifies it as one of the top weapons to come out of the DLC. If you're not familiar with Wing Stance, when you hold the Ash of War button and then hit the light attack, you will do a flurry of swipes. However, if you hit the heavy attack, your character will do a jumping attack which deals pierce damage. One of the better damage types because of the counterattack damage boost that you get. If you are attacking while an enemy is performing an attack, this is going to automatically boost any piercing attack damage by 30%. And as for stance damage, the light attack follow-up does around 16, and the heavy attack follow-up does almost double at around 30. This means with 3 heavy attacks, you can posture break almost all the bosses that have around 80 stance. Now I chose to go with the blood affinity on this weapon because of the low strength requirement. You can put most of your stats into dexterity and arcane. If you don't want to go with blood affinity, I recommend using keen, as you're going to get the highest AR for an RL 150 build. If you're higher levels, then I recommend going in quality. Now that we finished Placidusax, let's go ahead and take a look at the stats and equipment for our Milady build. So this is going to be a level 150 character. You're going to want 50 vigor, 14 mind, 21 endurance, 12 strength, 50 dexterity. We're getting 5 from Millicent's prosthesis, base intelligence, 33 faith, and 42 arcane. For buffs, I'm using Golden Bow and Howl Shabriri. Starting class I recommend to use is the Prophet. For equipment, we have a Milady at plus 25 in blood affinity. We also have a rapier in the offhand to proc the white mask and Lord of Blood's exaltation with seppuku. We have a dry leaf seal. We have the white mask. The rest of the armor is the Rakshasa set, Millicent's prosthesis, Lord of Blood's exaltation, Rellana's cameo, Shard of Alexander. Bosses that don't bleed, you can switch to the full Rakshasa set and swap out the Lord of Blood's exaltation for the Rotten Wing Sword insignia. And in the physic, we have the dexterity tier and the thorny crack tier. So the next skill we're going to make a build for is going to be the overhead stance. This is going to be a skill that you can only use currently on the Great Katana. Hopefully that changes with the patch in the future, but I highly doubt it. Now here we're going to be fighting Malenia, and I'm actually including this fight. If you notice, my character has no buffs on. And this is to show you just how much better this skill got because of the buff to Rellana's cameo. In this clip, I'll mostly use the heavy attack follow-up, which, as you've seen, the character does 3 downward swipes. This is going to be good for building up blood loss and to proc the multi-hit talismans, which of course we're going to be using on this build. If you do use the light attack follow-up, just like I did right there, you'll do 1 quick slash down. And as for the stance damage, as you see we got a stance break right there. The light attack follow-up does about 11 stance damage. And the heavy attack follow-up does approximately 22 stance damage if all 3 hits connect. Now the nice thing about weapons with passive bleed is that you can go with the occult affinity, which means that you only need to go into 1 stat, which is going to boost your damage, and it's also going to increase the blood loss on the weapon. And so since we're going to be going into mostly arcane, we will go into some faith, and that means you can pair it with one of the best seals in the game, the Dragon Communion seal. At plus 10, the seal is going to get an S scaling in arcane and a B scaling in faith. Before we drink the physic, we were getting 336 incant scaling. I have the faith tier in the physic, and after drinking it, that pushed up our incant scaling up to 359. Not only do you have access to a variety of dragon incantations, but when you push it up to 33 faith, you have access to at least 2 of my favorite incantations in the game, which are Pest Thread Spears and Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike. If you do want to use more faith-based incantations, you can take some points away from arcane. But to maximize this build, I recommend you go with the following stats. So let's go ahead and go over the stats and equipment for our overhead stance Great Katana build. So here's our level 150 stats. You're going to want 50 vigor, 15 mind, 22 endurance, 14 strength, 18 dexterity, base intelligence, 23 faith, we're getting 10 from the faith tier, and 80 arcane. Golden Vow and Howl Shabriri as buffs. I use the Prophet as a starting class. For equipment, we have the Great Katana at plus 25, Occult Affinity. Rapier in the offhand with Seppuku to proc the White Mask and the Lord of Blood's Exaltation buffs. We have a Dragon Communion seal at plus 10, and after drinking the physic, we have a 359 incant scaling. The White Mask, Rakshasa set for the rest of the armor. Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Rotwing Sword Insignia, Rolana's Cameo, Shard of Alexander. And for bosses that don't bleed, you can go with the full Rakshasa set and swap out the Lord of Blood's Exaltation for Millicent's Prosthesis. And in the physic, we have the Faith tier and the Thorny Crack tier. The next skill we're going to build around is going to be the Moon and Fire stance on the Rolana's Twin Blades. Now this weapon actually won twice from this update, not only by the buff from Rolana's Cameo, but the weapon itself received a buff and has increased damage at lower intelligence and faith levels. This means that for this build, we're going to go split down the middle, intelligence and faith. Now I'm showcasing this fight against the Fire Giant because when you go up against an enemy that is resist to fire, you're going to use the magic side of things. When you go up against an enemy that's either neutral or resistant to magic, you can use the fire side of things, or you can use both skills like I'm using here against Godfrey. To get the magic projectiles, you're going to want to input the light attack after going into the stance, and to get the fire tornado, you're going to want to input the heavy attack when you go into the stance. Now this weapon actually got a second buff. When you're in the moon stance and using the projectiles go farther and deal more stance damage. Now I don't have the exact numbers, but it would seem to me that the projectiles themselves do a certain amount of stance damage, and if you connect with the weapon as well, you'll be doing a lot more stance damage. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the build, stats, and equipment. It's a level 150 character. You're going to want 50 vigor, 19 mind, 22 endurance, 13 strength, 16 dexterity, 50 intelligence, 50 faith, base arcane. We're using Golden Vow and Howl Shabriri as the incant buffs. When you're using the magic side of things, you're going to want to put down Terra Magica to boost the magic damage. I use the Confessor as a starting class. For equipment, we have Rolana's Twin Blades at plus 10. We have the Staff of the Great Beyond at plus 10. You'll get 315 incant scaling and sorcery scaling. We have a Spellblades Pointed Hat, Rakshasa's Armor for the rest of the armor set, Ritual Sword Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Rolana's Cameo, Shard of Alexander. When you're using the fire side of things, you can use the Fire Scorpion Charm. I don't recommend that you use both at the same time because of the damage negation penalty. In the physic, when you're using the magic side of things, use a Magic Shroud and Crack tier and the Intelligence Not Crystal tier. And we're using the fire side of things, you can switch those out for the Faith tier and the Flame tier. The next skill is going to be the Night-and-Flame Stance from the Sword of Night-and-Flame. It's going to have very similar stats and equipment as Rolana's Twin Blades. So we'll show this clip against Mohg. Again, the reason I'm showing this is because Mohg has 80 resistance to fire. So if you go all into one stat, mainly the fire stat, you're going to have a hard time with Mohg with the Sword of Night-and-Flame. Now yes, you do have access to incantations and sorceries, but again, we're showcasing this weapon and what the weapon can do. And now with the buff to Rolana's Cameo, this is just going to cement it as one of the best weapons in the game. As you saw there, we got 2 different damages when we didn't proc the talisman and when we did. So for stats and equipment, this is going to be a level 150 character. You're going to want 55 vigor, 19 mind, 22 endurance, 12 strength, 12 dexterity, 50 intelligence, 50 faith, and base arcane. We're going to use Golden Vow, Hellish Rebuke as the incant buffs, and again, we're using Terra Magica to buff the magic side of things. I use the Confessor as a starting class for this one as well. Let's go over the equipment. You're going to want the Sword of Night-and-Flame at plus 10, Staff of the Great Beyond at plus 10, which is going to serve as your catalyst and your seal. For the armor, it's going to be the same as before, the Spellblade's Pointed Hat. The rest will be the Rakshasa set. For talismans, we're going to have the Ritual Sword Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm. When we're using the magic side of things, for when you're using the fire side of things, use the Fire Scorpion Charm. Rolana's Cameo, Shard of Alexander. In the physic, you're going to want the Magic Shroud and Crack tier and the Intelligence Not Crystal tier. Or if you're using the Flame Stance, you're going to want the Flame tier and the Faith tier. For the next build, it's going to be yet again another classic, the Transient Moonlight Stance from the Moonveil. This is going to be a very similar skill to Unsheathe, where you go into a stance to pull out your weapon, and with a light attack follow-up, you'll do a horizontal swipe, and if you do a heavy attack follow-up, as I'm mostly doing in this clip, you'll do an overhead swipe. The projectiles themselves will do approximately 12.5 stance damage. The heavy attack variant will deal an additional 17.5 stance damage for a total of 30 stance damage if you hit with the weapon and the projectile. The light attack variant does about 17 stance damage with the weapon for a total of 27.5 stance damage if you hit with the weapon and the projectile. Now, I didn't talk about it enough, but the Staff of the Great Beyond is definitely one of the better staffs when you're at lower faith and intelligence. Compared to the Prince of Death staff and the Gelmir Glintstone staff, you're going to get way better scaling for the stats that we have on this character and the last couple of characters for our lower intelligence and faith allocation. So let's take a look at the stats. It's a level 150 character. You want 50 vigor, 14 mind, 21 endurance, 12 strength, 40 dexterity. We get 10 from the dexterity tier, 50 intelligence, 33 faith, base arcane. We're using Golden Vow and Hellish Rebuke as the incant buffs, and we're putting down Terra Magica to buff the magic side of the weapon. For starting class, I recommend the Confessor. You want a Moonveil at plus 10. You want the Staff of the Great Beyond at plus 10 for your catalyst and seal. Same armor as before, the Spellblade's Pointed Hat, Rakshasa set for the rest of the armor. Ritual Sword Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Rolana's Cameo, and the Shard of Alexander. In the physic, I'm using the Dexterity Not Crystal tier and the Magic Shroud and Crack tier. The Dex tier will give you better overall AR, but if you want to buff the magic projectile, I recommend using the Intelligence tier instead of the Dex tier. The next stance build is going to be using Unsheathe, which again was already an S tier option, and with the buff to Rolana's Cameo has become even better. So with this stance, if you do a light attack, you're going to do a horizontal swipe, which comes out relatively quick and deals about 15 stance damage. But the main attraction here is going to be the heavy attack follow-up, which when it connects deals about 30 stance damage. And if you're paying attention to the damage numbers, you'll see that the heavy attack is doing significantly less damage when we don't proc the talisman, and that's why I chose to showcase this fight against Rolana. She's very relentless, and now we don't have to wait that extra half a second. You'll be able to proc that talisman and get your attack off and defeat your enemies. Let's take a look at the stats and equipment. It's going to be a level 150 character. You want 50 vigor, 17 mind, 22 endurance, 18 strength, 17 dexterity. We get 5 from Millicent's prosthesis. Base intelligence, 23 faith. We get 10 from the faith tier, and 75 arcane. I use the hero as a starting class. As for the equipment, we're going to have a Nagakiba at plus 25 in occult affinity with Unsheathe. Dragon Community Seal at plus 10. We're getting 354 incant scaling with the faith tier active. You have a rapier in the offhand with seppuku to proc the white mask and the Lord of Blood's exaltation. We have the white mask, the Rakshasa's armor set, Millicent's prosthesis, Rolana's cameo, Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's exaltation. For enemies that don't bleed, I recommend swapping out the Lord of Blood's exaltation for the Rotwing sword insignia, Blade of Mercy, or the dagger talisman. Swap out the white mask for the Rakshasa helm, and in the physic, you're going to want the faith tier and the blood-sucking crack tier. Now, if you don't want to use the blood-sucking crack tier, you can use a defense tier, or you can use the dexterity tier for a little bit more AR. And for our last stance is going to be my personal favorite, Square Off. It's not talked about enough. I think it's highly underrated, and it's probably one of the best stance-breaking skills in the game. So when you go into your stance, you can do a heavy follow-up, which can deal 40 stance damage, or do the light attack, which will deal 30 stance damage. It's not flashy, but as you'll see here against Commander Gaius, it gets the job done. Now, I chose to pair it with the Lord Sworn Straight Sword because of the 110 crit. I chose the 110 crit because we're going to be getting a lot of stance breaks. If you want to get the highest AR though, you should probably go with either the broadsword or the longsword, depending on what levels you're going to be. At higher levels, I believe the longsword is going to get higher AR than all other straight swords. Now down goes Commander Gaius. Let's go ahead and go over the stats and equipment for this build. Again, it's going to be a level 150 build. You want 60 vigor, 19 mind, 32 endurance, 11 strength, 10 dexterity, those are base intelligence, 80 faith, and base arcane. For buffs, we're going to use Golden Vow and Howl Shabriri. For starting class, for min-maxing, I recommend you use the Prophet. Let's go ahead and go over the equipment. We have Lord Sworn Straight Sword at plus 25 in Flame Art Affinity, Erdtree Seal at plus 10. You'll be getting 353 incant scaling, the full Rakshasa set, Blade of Mercy, Spear Talisman, Rolana's cameo, Shard of Alexander, and in the physic, you're going to want the Stone Barb crack tier and the Flame Shrouding crack tier. Now, as I wrap up the video and show a little bit more gameplay with Rolana's Twin Blades, I just want to add for our last build, if you do go up against an enemy that's resist to fire, all you have to do is change the affinity to Sacred and swap out the Holy tier instead of the Flame tier. And that's all 7 stance skills with a build for each one that were buffed by Rolana's cameo. Let me know what you guys think of the builds. Let me know what you guys would have done differently or if I made any mistakes. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. If you haven't joined the Discord, there's going to be a link in the description. Also, Monday to Thursday, I'm live here and on Twitch doing weapon runs or other challenge runs. I just recently completed a Vigor only run. Right now, I'm in the middle of a Square Off Ash only skill run, mainly because it's just kept off of everybody's lists. There's been some top 5 videos out there, and none of those top 5 videos have Square Off on them. So that's going to be it for today. Stay tuned for more content. Hopefully I'll see you live, and if not, I'll see you on the next one. Bye.